I decided to do my lesson plan on third grade science in the water cycle. Today we're going to be doing a precipitation experiment. The big idea of this whole unit is how to explain the water cycle and answer the question, where does water come from and where does it go? So the Common Core standards that I will be hitting in this lesson, for science, it's represent data in tables and graphical displays to describe typical weather conditions. For literacy, I'm going to hit describe the relationship between a series of scientific ideas or concepts, using language that pertains to time, sequence, cause, and effect, and engage effectively in a range of collaborative conversations. So we'll see the whole class discussion and group work throughout the lesson. And my learning targets are understand that water changes into different forms of matter at different stages of the water cycle, discuss and examine the difference between evaporation, condensation, and precipitation through experiments, generate the water cycle, specifically precipitation, by participating in a group experiment, summarize the information from the experiment into observation notes, compare the notes and the experiment outcome with others through pair share and whole class discussion. So prior to this, students will have learned an overview of the water cycle. They'll have made a chart. We'll have made a chart as a class that has, clouds, rain, lakes, the ocean, ground, and it just shows the water cycle and it hits the key points at each stage. I would explain to the students how condensation is the opposite of evaporation, and then move into precipitation, what we have here. So I guess we'll start with the experiment. My hook would be just to review the water cycle chart, and get them engaged in a little water cycle boogie dance thing. And I discuss each element on the water cycle chart and different forms of matter at the different stages of the water cycle. And I'd stop at precipitation and ask the students to think about rain. What is rain? How does rain happen? And then I would explain to them that today we're doing an experiment on precipitation and we're going to make it rain in our jars. And I would simulate the experiment to them first and then walk around, and teacher directed would pour the hot water, and then they would continue with the next steps. So they'd break up into their lab groups and go to the experiment station where the materials would be set up, and they'd also have this sheet of paper, observation notes, so they can individually take notes and observations as they work in their groups. So let's do the experiment and we'll go from there. So the process is to pour really hot water into the jar. So it's about 2 inches. So we'll go right about there. Then a lot of vapor. Then cover the jar with a plate. You want to let it wait for a couple minutes, so we'll time for 1 minute starting now. And the key questions that I want the students to focus on during the experiment are, what do you see happening inside the jar? So at this time they would say, all right, there's condensation around the jar. The water is staying clear, no difference in the water. We can feel heat on the outside of here, but not up here yet. And then as we take the ice cubes and put it on top of the plate, I want them to think about, where are the water drops forming? Are they the same size? How does the water get on the bottom of the plate inside the jar? And I want them to write their observations. So let's see. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and put the ice on the plate. So now we're adding coldness to the hot jar. And as we observe, I see smoke and evaporation kind of in a circular motion coming through inside the jar, it looks like a cloud, right? So when the vapor turns back in the water, it makes clouds happen, and then clouds cause the precipitation, which turns into rain along with, dirt and soil and other particles inside the precipitation that makes water and rain. So now, looks like we're having different size drops of rain coming in, forming on top of the plate, and soon enough it will start raining from the top of the plate down through the jar. Might turn this so you can kind of see what's happening. I don't know. Does this show it? It's hot. Oh, there it goes. I see some raindrops. All right. So after the group experiment, we would have partners. You'd partner off and share your observation notes with somebody in another group, so you can kind of see what other groups did and if you got the same results, if they were similar, different, compare and contrast, see what's going on there. And the explanation to this, I would use direct instruction as I was going around the groups and during whole class discussion, let them know that the cold plate causes the moisture in the warm air, which is inside the jar, to condense and form water droplets. This is the same thing that happens in the atmosphere. Warm, moist air rises, which is right here, warm, moist air rises. It meets the colder air high in the atmosphere. The water vapor condenses and forms precipitation that falls to the ground. So that's the idea of precipitation. So after that, we'd go back to our desks and I would facilitate a whole group discussion on precipitation around the world and what that looks like in different areas. I project this guy, kind of shows you the different climates and precipitation fall around the world, and I'd ask the students to share 2 things that they learned, and I'd call on a couple people to share that aloud, and then as their exit ticket, they'd record 2 things that they learned about precipitation within the experiment. For higher level students, I'd probably challenge them to come up with more observations or maybe 3 things that they learned. Try to give them a little extra work to think about, and then I'd also pair students that didn't really understand the key concepts of the water cycle with more tag students or people who are getting the key concepts and using the academic language of the weather cycle and the water cycle. So that would be awesome. And I'd also have sounds. There's this cool website that has like wind and rain and ocean, and you can do different levels of volume for the different sounds, and I'd have that playing in the classroom, kind of give them some audio to think about what they're learning. So yeah, and after this lesson, what would they do? So subsequent lessons, we'd end with saturation. So we do one more experiment, and then analyze the text, Listen to the Rain by Bill Martin and John Archibald. And then for the final assessment, I'd have the students create a play based on the water cycle. So there's a couple books that do a play about, rain and all this stuff. So, and answer the question, which is the central question of the unit, where does water come from and where does it go? And so I'd have them presented in a play at the very end of the unit, and then kind of be a segue into play events and different parts of a play, and use that as our next unit for literacy. So ta-da, that's my experiment, the water cycle for 3rd grade science. Okay.